Hello and welcome to The Point World Affairs. I'm Tae-sang-mi. In an unexpected turn of events, the second Kim-Trump summit in the Vietnamese capital of Hanoi was cut short without a joint declaration. But despite the breakdown in talks, President Trump remained optimistic that negotiations could resume in the near future. To get some more analysis on where the two sides currently stand following these setbacks, we have with us Dr. Yoo, Professor of International Politics at National University of Singapore. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
The second Kim-Trump summit held in Hanoi, Vietnam, was cut short and concluded without a joint declaration. While the two leaders initially expressed their will and expectations to achieve substantial results through the talks, they failed to narrow differences on specific denuclearization measures and sanctions relief.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion. We had to walk away from that.
On the same night, North Korea's foreign minister staged a surprise press conference to deny President Trump's claims about why the two-day summit ended without an agreement. He says, contrary to Trump's claims, Pyongyang only sought partial sanctions relief.
일부 해제, 구체적으로는 유엔 제재결의 총 11건 가운데서 2016년부터 17년까지 채택된 5건, 그중에서 민수 경제와 인민 생활에 지장을 주는 항목들만 먼저 해제하라는 것입니다.
The differences between their positions appeared too big for any sort of fresh accord.
I don't want to put myself in that position from the standpoint of negotiation, but, we want a lot to be given up.
미국 측은 영변지구 핵시설 폐기 조치 외에 한 가지를 더 해야 한다고 끝까지 주장했으며, 따라서 미국이 우리의 제안을 수용할 준비가 되어 있지 않다는 것이 명백해져 있습니다.
Up until the morning before the official start of the summit, the two leaders made positive comments, raising expectations about the outcome of the talks.
We had very good discussions last night at dinner, and the pre-dinner was very good, and there are a lot of great ideas being thrown about. I think very importantly, the relationship is, just very strong. And when you have a good relationship, a lot of good things happen.
But the atmosphere soon changed after the extended bilateral meeting went on longer than expected, and a planned working lunch between the leaders was called off abruptly without any specific reasons given. President Trump's repeated emphasis on the need for speed control and Chairman Kim's mention of having to be more patient also suggested that negotiations could drag on for a longer period. However, in a press conference after the summit was scrapped, Trump stressed that the talks were making progress and that his relationship with Chairman Kim was still friendly.
This wasn't a walk away like you get up and walk out. No, this was very friendly. We shook hands. There's a warmth that we have. Now, I hope that stays. I think it will.
On this week's The Point World Affairs, we discuss the reasons behind the failed summit and anticipate the future direction of denuclearization negotiations. We also connect with experts from neighboring countries like China, Russia, and Japan to hear their reactions on the Hanoi summit.
Okay, Professor, so we have been following this whole issue, the whole big summit in Hanoi between the two leaders. But looking back at the whole event, how did you feel about this?
Well, like many people, I was surprised when President Trump decided to walk away from signing any deal with North Korea, right? After all, he traveled about 16,000 miles to get to Hanoi. And Kim Jong-un also traveled for 65 hours, right, by rail to get to Hanoi. And in the end, they didn't get any agreement whatsoever. I think it's now quite obvious why the talks failed, because the two leaders could not bridge their differences and sign an agreement. The key issue was how much economic sanctions to lift in exchange for how much denuclearization from North Korea. And based on President Trump's press conference, it's obvious that North Korea was willing to completely dismantle the Yongbyon nuclear facility in exchange for the removal of the entire economic sanctions on Pyongyang. And that's something that the United States was not willing to accept. And therefore, the U.S. side made a proposal to North Korea that North Korea has to make more substantial and comprehensive denuclearization deal, right, which includes the dismantlement of some other nuclear facilities, including the highly enriched uranium facilities. And that's something that North Korea could not accept. So as a result, the talks failed.
Right, but as you said, this outcome of the summit was definitely unexpected by a lot of commentators, a lot of watchers really in the field. But when we take a look at these kind of precedents, there are definitely those working level talks that resume ahead of these summits between the leaders of two countries. But do you think perhaps these working level talks did not go well, or were the two leaders aware of this situation?
Sure. So we know that the U.S. Special Representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun, met with his North Korean counterparts several times, both in and outside North Korea, and he could not get a satisfactory result. And that's when he decided to bump it up to Mike Pompeo. And Secretary Pompeo also met with his North Korean counterparts, and he couldn't get a satisfactory result. So he decided to bump it up to President Trump. So when the two leaders met in Hanoi, they were left with the task of ironing out the differences between the two countries and reaching an agreement. And in the end, they could not bridge their differences, and they did not have any agreement.
There were two press conferences. First was by President Trump, as you mentioned. And then later in the night, we had another conference in the Melia Hotel where Kim Jong-un was staying by his top aides. So what did you think about that?
Well, I think the two countries are trying to blame each other for the failed talks in Hanoi, right? But also at the same time, I think it's a positive sign that because they are taking the meetings in Hanoi seriously, and they are positioning themselves for future negotiations. So I think when I saw the press conference from North Korea, to me that was a good sign that in the future, they will probably think about holding working level meetings with the United States. And if those meetings go well, then maybe we could even see a third summit between the two countries. But that all depends on how the working level talks proceed in the future.
All right, but let's hear what other people around the world think about this outcome. Okay. So to glean more perspective on the outcome of the summit, we now connect to an expert in the United States. Joining me now is Doug Bando, Senior Fellow at the Cato Institute. Thank you for joining us, Doug.
Happy to be on.
What do Americans think about President Trump's decision to walk away from signing a deal rather than reaching some sort of an agreement?
Well, most Americans would have preferred to have had a good agreement. I think they support the idea that if you have something in front of you that's not right, that you don't sign it just to sign an agreement. So he probably gained himself some credibility. If he comes back in the future with an agreement, people are more likely to view it as a good one because they know that he's willing to walk away if necessary.
During the Hanoi summit between the two leaders, President Trump's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, had a testimony in front of the U.S. Congress. He called President Trump a liar, a con man, a racist. Do you think this testimony has some kind of effect in the collapse deal, perhaps, in any way?
No, I don't think the testimony mattered for the summit. In effect, what the testimony did is just reinforced the views of everybody in America. If you didn't like Donald Trump, you assumed they're true. If you like Donald Trump, you probably assume Michael Cohen's lying. And if you're confused about everything, he just left you even more confused. The reality is, most people would like to see the president succeed on a foreign mission, whatever they think of him personally. This is all very embarrassing, but you know, we've had this every day in Washington since Donald Trump was elected. This would have destroyed a prior president. You know, President Trump, everybody kind of shrugs and says, well, we kind of knew that about him anyway, and they're just moving on.
Thank you. That was Doug Bando, specializing in foreign policy in Washington, D.C. Now, Professor, what did you think about the analysis of Mr. Bando?
Well, there's one aspect about what he said that I would respectfully disagree. So I think the ongoing investigation into President Trump's collusion with the Russian government may have had some impact on the way the President Trump approached the meetings in Hanoi. So obviously, President Trump could not sign any kind of sort of easy or comfy deal with North Korea, take it back home in the USA, and try to sell it to the domestic audience, including the opposition party. Doing so would have invited more criticism at home. And therefore, in the end, President Trump had to demand a more substantial and comprehensive nuclear denuclearization agreement from North Korea. And as we know, that North Korea could not accept that. So that's why we did not have any agreement, right, in Hanoi. So the domestic politics in the USA, in my opinion, definitely had some impact on the way President Trump approached the North Korean issue.
Right. Let's go back a little bit. Before the presser, the White House actually announced that the summit was very good between the two leaders, and then they also used the word constructive. So I want to focus a little bit on this word. You know, some commentators say constructive is a word that it's a diplo speech to describe something that didn't really go well, but they want to obscure it a little bit. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, at least it suggests that the United States does not want to completely end negotiation with North Korea. So there's that intention to continue negotiating with North Korea in the future, which is a positive sign. I think the talks in Hanoi were in fact rather constructive. So the two leaders actually sat down and discussed many details about denuclearization process, improving bilateral relations, and achieving a more permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula. So to that extent, they now understand the other better. And therefore, in the future, if and when they decide to meet again, right, to negotiate between the two countries, then there is a higher hope that they'll be talking about substance.
Okay. Neighboring countries like China, Russia, and Japan may have some mixed feelings about the unexpected outcome of the second Kim-Trump summit. We connect to each of these countries. Joining me now first is Steve Chung, Assistant Lecturer of Global Studies Program at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Welcome, Professor.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you very much.
China also seems to be surprised by the breakdown of the summit and is urging the two countries to sit down and continue their dialogue. What impact would the results of the summit have on the part of China?
Well, I think China, on one hand, they will be very surprised by the situation that because they also have a high expectation that there will be a genuine denuclearization will be take place. But I think that that's very coincident that Chinese government, they also have a big confrontation with the U.S. government regarding the trade conflict. So I think on the other hand, China will also be willing to see that if the dialogue between U.S. and the DPRK was not going that well, it will also give some benefit to China because whenever there's some problem between U.S. and the DPRK, and obviously China can play a very important role in bridging between the U.S. and the DPRK. So I think talking about the situation now, because China also can facilitate the entire dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea. And at the same time, that if China can contribute to this kind of dialogue in the future, probably if the U.S. would like to take the Chinese interest more than now, because I think when China would like to contribute more to the sanction regimes imposed on North Korea, and China can work more to maintain these situations, and also China can help the U.S. to talk to the North Korean regime.
Thank you, Professor Steve Chung, based in Hong Kong. We go straight to Japan this time. Joining us now is Sachu Nakado, Professor of International Relations at Ritsumeikan University. Good to have you on again, Professor.
Good to see you again.
What is the Japanese public sentiment on the result of the Hanoi summit?
Basically, there are two understandings in Japan. The first understanding is that that was a kind of disappointment and unexpected result. On the other hand, we think that maybe no agreement might be better than bad agreement. Bad agreement means that a kind of compromise by President Trump with that concretely denuclearization issue. So that did not happen. In that sense, yes, I would say no agreement might be better than bad agreement.
Professor, we know that Prime Minister Abe has been talking to President Trump about the issues that's pending inside Japan, that is with North Korea. And Prime Minister Abe had asked Trump to deliver some of the messages about the abductee issues and other issues to Kim Jong-un. But what do you think from now on the relationship would go on with Japan and the two countries?
Yeah, that's a very important question for Japan. Prime Minister Abe actually had a telephone talk with President Trump after the summit meeting. And President Trump clearly informed Prime Minister Abe that he brought up the abduction issue when he negotiated with Chairman Kim Jong-un. And Japan, of course, really appreciates President Trump. So in that sense, Japan and the United States maintain a close communication in dealing with North Korean issue. And also at the same time, Prime Minister Abe actually expressed his strong will to have a summit meeting with Chairman Kim Jong-un. Prime Minister Abe even mentioned that it is a time for Japan to proceed with negotiation with North Korea. There will be a slight higher possibility for Japan to develop relation with North Korea when the United States and DPRK, their relations go pretty well. There will be no room for Japan to explore the possibility to contact North Korea. But this time, unfortunately, the two leaders failed to make agreement. So in that sense, they might give Japan a possibility to explore another opportunity to contact North Korea.
Thank you, Professor Nakaru. We now go straight to Russia. Joining us is Artyom Lukin, Professor of International Studies at Far Eastern Federal University. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Professor, what is Russian public reaction to the result of the Kim-Trump summit?
Yes, I agree that the results of the Hanoi summit are somewhat disappointing. I think most of us expected some kind of deal, and actually nothing came out, which was, yes, a little bit surprising. But I don't think it was a disastrous failure. Still, we've got, some chance, some opportunities to reach a deal further down the road. I think it's important that President Trump emphasized that the North Korea-US negotiations would continue at a lower level, working level. He said that he continues to have a very good relationship with Chairman Kim. The press conference by Foreign Minister Ri Yong-ho, I think it's important that even the North Koreans at the press conference, they didn't close the door to further negotiations. So I think that both sides are ready to continue negotiations, and I think that's pretty important.
Professor Artyom Lukin from Vladivostok, thank you all for your insights. Now, Professor, what did you think about the reactions of the neighboring countries, and what is the situation here in South Korea? It hasn't been many days, but what do people talk about it?
Well, it's all very good analysis. I'd like to add that China plays the most important role among all other countries, non-direct parties to the nuclear talks here, because China is the only country that actually has some leverage over Pyongyang. So it'll be useful if President Xi Jinping either meets with Chairman Kim or calls him up and tells him that you need to get more serious about denuclearization. I think the reactions in South Korea, just like many other countries, have been by and large a disappointment, right? So a lot of Koreans expected a good result would come out of Hanoi, and that would pave a way towards establishing more permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula and the improvement of inter-Korean relations. But because of no agreement out of Hanoi, I think the inter-Korean relations and a more permanent peace on the Korean Peninsula need to wait now.
we just heard that maybe no deal is better than a bad deal. And President Trump also had said that he wants to do it right and not fast. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree that no deal is better than a bad deal, right? And President Trump, because of his domestic political troubles, could not sign any kind of deal with North Korea that would invite domestic political criticism of himself. So that's why President Trump pushed for a hard and more comprehensive and substantial denuclearization deal from North Korea, which North Korea could not accept, but that is not the end of the negotiations. I think North Koreans will go back to the drawing board and they will reassess their strategies. And if they think that they could find some room to accommodate the U.S. demand, then we will see a flurry of diplomatic activities taking place in the coming weeks and months. So let's not be too pessimistic, right? Because just because we got a no deal from Hanoi, as I said, because these two leaders spoke in detail about various aspects of denuclearization, that to me is a very positive step forward.
Right, so you're saying we don't have to worry about going back to old days of nuclear provocations by North Korea, all these missile testings. We don't have to worry about that.
Not anytime soon, because neither the United States nor North Korea want to be the first one to break or terminate the negotiation, right? So, apparently, according to President Trump, the Chairman Kim had told him that North Korea would not test another nuclear weapon or missiles. Although things could change in the future, but I don't think such tests will be likely in any time soon. I don't think any foreseeable future we are going back to the old days where the tensions were very high and the likelihood of military conflict on the Korean Peninsula was increasing.
Right, and talking about the role of the neighboring countries, especially China, you mentioned that China's role is very important, but right now China is in a trade talk with the U.S. and President Xi Jinping is actually supposed to be meeting with President Trump soon in his Mar-a-Lago. So what do you think about that? Do you think this trade talks between the U.S. and China has anything to do with President Xi convincing Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think there was a time when Chinese government wanted to link North Korea issue with the trade issue, right? And the United States said very clearly that these two issues cannot be linked. So hopefully these two leaders, the Chinese president and the U.S. president, deal these two issues separately. Although if the Chinese president puts more pressure on Pyongyang and nudges Pyongyang towards the path of denuclearization, that could probably mean better things for the Chinese government when it comes to trade deals with the United States. But by and large, these two countries are treating these two issues separately.
Okay, and before I let you go, President Trump had said the relationship between him and Kim Jong-un is very good, and they still have trust, and they will keep on going with the nuclear talks. Do you think we are going in the right direction?
Well, I think the two leaders are still, by and large, on good terms, right, with each other, and which is a positive sign. I think there are two main factors that we should pay attention. One is the U.S. domestic politics. So if the President Trump gets into more political troubles at home, then North Korea could reassess its chances of striking a deal with the United States. So if North Korea perceives that maybe an impeachment process would begin against President Trump or his re-election chances dwindle, then North Korea would not have much incentive to sit down and negotiate with President Trump, right, which could delay the talks, which could delay the denuclearization and peace process on the Korean Peninsula. The other factor, to me, is the most fundamental in the entire issue, which is North Korea's intention to denuclearize. I've said this on this program at many other places, that what North Korea is going after is not denuclearization, but either nuclear freeze or disarmament. Right? And I think North Korea wanted to say that in Hanoi to the United States. President Trump said very clearly that it has to be more comprehensive and substantial. So it's now really the high time for the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, to think seriously about which path North Korea wants to choose. Right? If it takes steps towards denuclearization in a genuine and serious manner, then there will be a very bright economic future for North Korea. If it wants to pursue the two goals at the same time, then the sanctions will not be lifted on Pyongyang in any easy manner. And that means that his Byungjin policy, right, whose aim is to achieve strong and prosperous nation cannot be realized. So it's a high time for North Korean leader to make some serious decision now.
Okay, we have a lot of things up in the air, especially the third summit. We still do not know any date or settings about it, but it was out talk of it. You know, President Trump did talk about it. And of course, Kim Jong-un's reciprocal Seoul visit is also up in the air. So we'll keep close tabs on those issues. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
President Trump claimed that the talks ended in an amicable manner and the atmosphere was pleasant despite the setback. We'll have to wait and see if this is just a minor bump in the road and perhaps even an incentive for the two sides to redouble their efforts toward finding an agreement. That's all we have for this week's The Point World Affairs. Thank you for joining us and see you again next week.